There's a kind of pain that never screams. It moves in silence, like water slipping through invisible cracks. It's the pain of those who feel too much. People who carry inside their chest a radar that never switches off, picking up every vibration, every glance, every tiny change in someone's tone of voice. These people don't just notice others, they absorb them. It's subtle at first. You're in a conversation, and without realizing it, your rhythm starts syncing with theirs. You laugh when they laugh. You stay quiet when they shut down. And suddenly, your body learns a secret language. The language of shrinking in order to fit. Some people are born with this instinct. They walk into a room and immediately feel the emotional temperature before anyone says a word. They know when something's wrong. They know when someone's sad, even behind a smile. And that sensitivity, which looks like a gift, slowly turns into a burden. Because feeling someone else so deeply is like diving into a pool of reflections and forgetting to come back up for air. Every emotion from the outside seeps in. Every fear, every tension, every anxiety, and what once was empathy turns into confusion. You start losing the outline of your own identity. Psychology calls this emotional fusion. It's when the boundaries between you and the other person disappear. When love becomes surveillance. When care becomes control. When I understand you quietly morphs into, I feel for you. Many people were raised like this. They were kids who learned early to read the room, not out of curiosity, but for survival. Children who had to figure out the mood of the house before saying a word. Kids who, instead of playing, observed. Kids who tried to predict the next move of the adults so they could avoid anger, abandonment, chaos. And that instinct to observe became a mask of calm, of control, of exaggerated sensitivity. Inside, the body vibrated. Outside, everything looked fine. But every glance, every shift in tone, every change in the air, felt like a threat. That child grew up. And now, they're the person who feels too much, who understands too much, who carries the world on their shoulders and still apologizes for not being enough. They know what others need before anyone asks. And in return, almost no one ever asks what they feel. There's a silent paradox in this. To love others so deeply that you forget yourself. To understand so much that you dissolve. And this is where emotional exhaustion is born, a kind of soul anemia. You give, 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 and suddenly you look inside and there's nothing left. The mind tries to compensate. It creates a logic. If I'm useful, I'll be loved. If I understand them, they'll stay. But that kind of love is conditional. It's a desperate attempt to prevent rejection through empathy. And underneath it all, there's only fear. Fear of disappearing completely. The body starts reacting. Constant tension. Tiredness with no clear cause. Silences that hurt. A sadness that doesn't come from the outside, but from the absence of self. Because when you're always feeling others, there's no room left to feel yourself. And the world, for people like this, is made of invisible noise. They don't hear words. They hear frequencies. They don't see faces. They see stories. Every room is an emotional tide. Every relationship, a minefield of sensations. Being sensitive is beautiful, they say. But no one talks about the cost. The cost of never resting emotionally. Of carrying guilt that isn't yours. Of apologizing for feelings you only absorbed. This sensitivity is like an antenna. It picks up everything, but doesn't filter anything. And without a filter, there's no peace. You become a broken mirror reflecting pain that doesn't belong to you. A translator of other people's silence while your own silence gets lost. There's a scene that repeats in many lives. You're sitting in front of someone you love, trying to understand how they feel. And suddenly you realize you don't know how you feel. Your emotion has blended with theirs, like spilled ink. And when you try to separate the colors, everything is already one shade. Too much empathy becomes erasure. Too much love without boundaries becomes disappearance. Loving someone cannot mean abandoning yourself. But those who learn to exist through others, don't know how to do it any other way. Psychology explains this as a blurring between empathy and identification. Empathy is when you feel with someone. Identification is when you feel for them. And when that line disappears, you start carrying what was never yours to hold. The body feels it first. Your shoulders stiffen. Your breath grows shallow. Your chest grows heavy. Because there are emotions inside you that don't belong to you. But no one ever teaches you how to return them. There comes a moment when the body gets tired of holding the world up, and you realize you've spent your whole life trying to fix pain that wasn't yours. Trying to be the bridge between other people's silence and their inner chaos. But no one notices that while you hold them up, you're the one sinking. This kind of sensitivity creates an invisible trap. Because the more you feel the other, the more you lose your own center. And when you finally try to come back home, you don't recognize the path. You've wandered too far into someone else's emotional territory, and now everything feels like you, even the things that aren't. There are people who live in a state of emotional fusion. They love, they help, they listen, they translate the unspoken. But when they're alone, they have no idea who they are without the reflection of another. They confuse loneliness with lack of purpose, because their identity was always built around someone else. And this loss of shape is almost invisible. It comes slowly. First, it's exaggerated empathy, then exhaustion, then silence, and finally, emptiness. Not an emptiness of lack, but of excess, of having felt so much that you dissolved. Psychology calls this empathic burnout. It's when the mind is worn out from feeling the world too intensely. When the nervous system is stuck in alert mode, trying to regulate emotions that don't belong to it. When the body screams for rest, but the heart keeps trying to save. And yes, it's beautiful. There's something deeply human about that kind of giving. But there's also something tragic. The inability to protect yourself from your own sensitivity. You become the mirror everyone uses to see themselves. And mirrors, when they reflect too much, eventually break. There's a common scene in therapy with people like this. They say, "I don't know what I like. I don't know what I want. I only know what the other person needs." And behind those sentences is an old story. The story of someone who learned to exist only when they were useful. When someone smiled, they were okay. When someone cried, they became comfort. But when that person left, there was nothing left inside. The absence of the other exposes the emptiness they were filling, and loneliness doesn't hurt because of lack of company. It hurts because of lack of identity. This is where psychology becomes a kind of restoring mirror. It asks, who are you when no one needs you? The answer comes slowly, between pauses and silent tears. Because the I of someone who feels too much is always a we, always dependent on an external presence for self-definition. But there is a way back. Not fast, not easy, but possible. And that way back begins with the body, with breath, with boundaries. Boundaries are what separate love from erasure, care from self-loss, empathy from emotional fusion. Learning to feel without absorbing is a practice of awareness. It's learning to observe others without becoming them, to notice someone's pain without having to carry it, to recognize that love too needs space to breathe. There's a deep tenderness in saying no, because no is the mature form of love. No is the space where yes can live. But for someone who's spent a lifetime being everyone's shelter, no feels dangerous. It feels cold. It feels like abandonment. So they stay quiet, and that silence becomes identity. But silence isn't peace. It's anesthesia. It's the body saying, enough feeling for others. It's the soul whispering, give me back to me. And when you finally begin listening to that voice, something shifts. A thread of presence starts to reweave itself. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if the body is remembering its own name. You start noticing the small things. The smell of the air after rain. The sound of your footsteps. The temperature of your hands. And you understand that being alive isn't absorbing the world. It's inhabiting it, with edges, with limits, with room to exist. People who feel too much are actually observers of the invisible. They live in an inner world full of sounds no one else hears. And that gift, because it is still a gift, only becomes a curse when you forget how to come back to yourself. Empathy is not a cage. But when you use it to protect yourself from rejection, it becomes a prison. You start feeling in order to predict, understanding in order to be accepted, giving in order not to be abandoned. And love, which should be free, becomes emotional surveillance. There's a hidden fear behind that surveillance, the fear of being selfish. But selfishness isn't self-preservation. It's losing yourself from giving too much, then resenting others for not saving you. Healing begins when you understand that feeling the other doesn't mean erasing yourself, that you can be present without vanishing, and that true love doesn't demand sacrifice. It asks for awareness. There comes a moment in life when the soul gets tired of carrying echoes. You realize you've spent years being a mirror, but never a reflection, that your identity dissolved in someone else's gaze, and what's left of you is a pile of reactions. Reactions to other people's pain, reactions to expectations, reactions to the fear of being too much or not enough. And when everything gets quiet, when the other is no longer there, all that remains is the noise of yourself. A strange, almost unfamiliar noise. You try to listen, but you don't recognize the sound of your own breath. Many people reach this point. In the middle of life, in the middle of love, in the middle of deep exhaustion. And they say, I don't know who I am anymore. But what they really mean is, I became what the other needed. Psychology looks at this with compassion, because behind that dissolution lies an ancient kind of love, the love of someone who believed they could only be loved by being necessary. It's a love built on emotional survival. Those who grew up with unstable affection learn early that feeling the other is a way to predict danger, and disappearing is a way to stay safe. This ability, to adapt to someone else's mood, is a child's armor. But when childhood ends, the armor becomes too small, and it starts to wound. Sensitive people grow up believing that to understand is to exist, and they get lost trying to decode the world's invisible cues. They become experts in other people's emotions, but beginners in their own. Every relationship brings a new reflection, every gaze, a new role. And in the middle of so many mirrors, the true I fades. But the body never forgets. The body always holds the memory of who you were before you started pleasing. There's a primitive memory hidden in the silence of the cells. A memory of when you simply were, without needing to earn anything. Before someone else's gaze, there was your own. Before guilt, there was presence. Therapy, at its core, is a homecoming. A slow, painful, beautiful return. It's like walking back into a house that's been closed for years, dusty, but still yours. You step in slowly, open the windows, let the air move through. And the silence that once suffocated you now feels like a gentle embrace. The rediscovery of self begins with the smallest gestures. A calm no. A pause before answering. A moment when you check in with what you feel, before rushing to care for someone else. It's in those small acts that your outline returns. The border between me and you reappears, and love starts breathing again. Because loving someone doesn't mean disappearing for them. It means being whole beside them. And that's only possible when you learn how to come back to your own body. The body is the first mirror of the soul. But when you live to feel others, your body stops being a home and becomes a tool. It listens, absorbs, translates, but never rests. Healing means giving the house back to yourself. It means recognizing the inner space that belongs only to you. A place no one else is allowed to enter, not even those you love. This separation isn't coldness, it's respect. It's love learning not to invade. It's care becoming consciousness. There's a difference between empathy and fusion. Empathy is presence with boundaries. Fusion is absence dressed up as love. And someone who lives fused with another doesn't love. They survive through them. Returning to individuality is, in a way, a spiritual act. It's not isolation, it's grounding. It's the I taking back the space that fear once gave away. When you begin listening to yourself, something shifts in the way you listen to others. Compassion stops being urgency and becomes choice. Love stops being rescue and turns into connection. Presence stops being performance and turns into rest. It's like the silence suddenly stops being painful. And in that silence you realize, feeling is not losing yourself. Feeling is inhabiting yourself. And inhabiting yourself includes boundaries. This realization doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves. Days where you feel whole. Days where you dissolve again. But every time you return, the return is faster. Your body learns the way back. And in the end, you realize you never truly lost yourself. You just drifted. And the reunion is always deeper than the loss. There's something sacred in feeling deeply. Even when it hurts. Even when it exhausts you. Even when it makes you forget who you are. Because that capacity, to sense the inner world of another, to touch the invisible, is proof that there is too much life inside you, not too little. The problem was never feeling too much. It was never learning where to place what you feel. Sensitive people confuse love with absorption. They believe loving is carrying. That understanding is healing. But love is not absorption. It is witnessing. It is standing before someone's pain and still remaining yourself. The world sometimes tells you otherwise. It says sensitivity is weakness. That feeling is lack of control. But the truth is, sensitivity is a rare form of clarity. It reveals what most people ignore. It shows you the invisible threads that connect everything. But to live with this gift, you need to learn how to hold your own silence. The difference between a gift and a wound is presence. When you feel and stay, the gift grows. When you feel and disappear, it becomes a wound. At some point, you understand you can't save anyone. And that's not a lack of love. It's respect for their journey. Everyone has to cross their own desert to find their own thirst. You can offer shade, but you can't walk the path for them. And from that understanding comes a quiet freedom. The freedom to be with someone without needing to vanish inside them. To love without fear of disappearing. To care without carrying what isn't yours. You begin practicing a new kind of presence. Presence that observes without invading. That listens without absorbing. That feels without dissolving. And that's when life changes texture. Relationships stop being emergencies and become encounters. Love stops being surveillance and becomes choice. Empathy stops being escape and becomes bridge. Because when you return to yourself, the world once again fits inside your chest, but differently. Smaller maybe. Calmer. Quieter. But infinitely more real. In the end, healing is not about stopping the feeling. It's about feeling everything. And still remaining whole. It's looking at the other and saying, I see you, without needing to say, I lose myself for you. It's allowing the other to exist outside of you, while staying connected. And there's beauty in that. Because when you learn to exist with boundaries, you discover that boundaries are what give love its shape. Without them, everything becomes ocean. With them, the shoreline appears, and the river begins to sing. Sensitivity then stops being a prison and becomes a path. You no longer feel to predict the world, you feel to live in it. You don't feel to fix, you feel to understand. You don't feel to protect, you feel to simply be. The silence returns, but now it's different. It's not absence, it's presence. Not loneliness, but space. You hear what was always there but you couldn't listen to before, the sound of your own existence, and you realize you never truly lost yourself. You just confused yourself with love. And love, when it matures, stops confusing. It becomes clarity. In the end, everything comes down to an invisible choice. To feel others as an escape, or to feel others as a path back to yourself. Because the more you feel the other, the more you learn to recognize yourself on the edges of that encounter. You don't disappear, you expand. And expansion is not erasure, it's awareness. True empathy doesn't steal you. It returns you. It brings you back to your body, to the present moment, to the simple truth of being alive. And that's where the cycle ends. You understand you never needed to stop feeling. You only needed to learn how to stay. The world stays the same, full of noise, faces, stories. But now, the sound that matters most is the sound of your own presence. And in the silence that remains, there is peace. Not the peace of escape, but the peace of finally finding yourself.